The desert wind, carrying the scent of rain and wild sage, swept across the endless New Mexico horizon. Old cowboy Luke Matthews leaned on the worn wooden fence of his ranch. The broken spur, a place that stretched farther than the eye could see. Acres of sunburned land, dotted with cattle grazing peacefully under the vast open sky. The years had etched deep lines into his face, a map of droughts and hard seasons. His once dark hair was now the color of silver, but his eyes, those clear, steel-blue eyes, held the same quiet strength they had 2 decades ago. Luke thought his days of surprises were long over, that life had shown him all its cards. But that was before he saw the rider coming up the dusty trail that afternoon. A young woman, with long raven hair and dark eyes that seemed to hold the fire of a midnight sky, carried herself with a calm, unspoken pride. She dismounted with a grace that made her boots land silently on the dirt, and she looked straight at him. "Mr. Matthews?" she asked, her voice soft, carrying a tenderness that felt both strange and familiar. Luke, ever the gentleman, tipped his hat. "Ma'am, you've got me at a disadvantage. Have we met before?" A faint smile touched her lips, but her gaze never wavered. "Yes," she said, 20 years ago. "I was the little Apache girl you saved from the river." The words struck Luke like a bolt of lightning. He froze, the memory hitting him with the force of a physical blow. 20 years earlier. He'd been a younger man, riding through the canyon during a fierce monsoon season. Over the clap of thunder, he'd heard desperate cries of a small child, clinging to a broken tree trunk, being swept along by the raging, muddy current. Without a second thought, he'd spurred his horse into the treacherous water, diving in to drag her to the shore. She was half-drowned and terrified. He had carried her to the nearby Apache settlement, where her people had taken her from his arms without a word. Their faces were cold, suspicious. He was an outsider, a cowboy, and he'd ridden away that day thinking he'd never see her again. And now here she stood, grown into a stunning woman, wrapped in a soft leather jacket radiating the quiet dignity of her ancestors. "You remembered," he finally managed to say, his voice raspy. "Never forgot," she replied, her tone resolute. "You saved my life, Luke Matthews. I came back, 'cause I made a promise." He frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. "A promise." She nodded. "When I was a child, my grandmother told me that a life saved must one day repay its debt, not with gratitude, but with devotion. She said I owed my heart to the man who pulled me from the river of death." Luke shifted uncomfortably, his weathered hands gripping the fence post. "Ma'am, that was a long time ago. Didn't save you to collect anything in return. Just did what anyone would have done." Her dark eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with a powerful determination. "I didn't come to repay a debt," she said quietly, her voice unwavering. "I came because I've searched for you since I was 16 years old. I came to marry you." The words hit him harder than any storm he'd ever weathered. A soft, disbelieving chuckle escaped him as he tried to break the sudden, intense tension. "You sure you got the right fella?" "I'm an old cowboy with more dust than dreams left in me." She took a step closer, closing the distance between them. Her voice remained steady, filled with a conviction that unsettled him. "I've seen the world, Luke. I went to school, I've worked, I've lived among strangers. But no one's heart ever felt as true as yours did that day. You didn't know me yet. You risked everything for me. That's the kind of man I prayed to find." He looked at her, really looked at her, for a long, hard moment. "You don't even know what kind of life this is," he said, his voice low. "It's lonely out here, it's hard. I've lost things, people. A woman like you deserves more." Her lips curved into a gentle, knowing smile. "And yet here you are, still standing, still kind, still alone. Maybe what you've lost I can help you find again." Luke turned away, pretending to adjust his gloves, but his heart was thudding, a heavy, unfamiliar rhythm in his chest. He'd lost his wife Evelyn years ago, taken by a fever before they'd even reached their 10th anniversary. Since then, he'd buried himself in work and silence, convinced that love wasn't a guest meant to visit him twice in one lifetime. But this woman, this Apache girl from the river, spoke with the calm certainty of fate itself. They spent that evening walking the ranch, their conversation flowing as the sun bled its brilliant colors across the western sky. She told him her name was Ayana, which meant eternal blossom. She had become a teacher, dedicating her life to bridging the gap between her people's ancient traditions and the modern world. She spoke of her dreams, of her grandmother's wisdom, and of the profound belief that some souls are tied together by rivers and storms. Luke listened, completely captivated. He was drawn to the gentle rhythm of her voice and the undeniable fire in her eyes. As the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, she looked up and whispered, "The river that nearly took me wasn't meant to drown me. It was meant to bring me to you, for the first time in years." Luke felt something stirred deep inside him, a feeling he had long thought buried. It was hope. It was wonder. It was the aching warmth of being truly seen. Days turned into weeks. Ayanna stayed, her presence weaving itself into the fabric of the ranch. She helped feed the calves, she mended fences with surprising skill, and she laughed when Luke grumbled about her experimental cooking. Slowly, the old cowboy's world began to change. The profound silence that had once haunted his home was now filled with soft laughter. The scent of wild herbs she'd gathered, and the quiet sound of two hearts learning to find their shared rhythm. One evening, as a summer storm rolled in from the mountains, Luke found her standing by the corral. The wind was tossing her hair like black silk, the air thick with the smell of ozone. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder, and he realized how eerily familiar it all felt, just like that storm 20 years ago. He walked up to stand beside her. "You sure you know what you're asking for, Ayanna?" he murmured, his voice barely audible above the rising wind. She turned to face him, her eyes shimmering like the first drops of rain. "I've waited 20 years to stand beside you, Luke. I think I'm sure." A genuine smile spread across Luke's face, erasing years of solitude and sorrow. For the first time in 2 decades, he let his guard down completely. "Then I guess I'd be a fool to say no." She stepped into his arms, and as she did, the rain began to fall, a soft, cleansing rain, as if it were a blessing from the sky itself. The next morning, brilliant sunlight broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Ayanna stood beside him on the porch, her hand held firmly in his. The land stretched before them, endless and wild, just like their story. Luke looked down at her, a profound sense of peace settling over him. "Guess the river brought me back to life too," he whispered. She smiled up at him, her eyes full of love. "It always knew where we belonged," and as the wind carried the scent of sage and rain across the valley, 2 souls once strangers, now bound by time and fate, found their home, right there in the heart of the desert. Sometimes the past doesn't return to haunt us, it returns to heal us. Love doesn't always come when we're young and fearless. Sometimes it rides back across 20 years of dust and memory, just to remind us that what's truly meant for us never really leaves. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. We'll see you next time.